Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this exciting event, looking back, marching forward. Mandy Carter, Walter Naegle, Barbara Smith, and Kamau Pope in conversation, reflecting on the urgency of connecting history with current struggles for freedom and justice. My name is Laura Mickham, and I'm the director of the Sally Bingham Center for Women's History and Culture and the curator of Gender and Sexuality History Collections in the Rubenstein Library at Duke University. After covering a few logistical details, I look forward to calling on my esteemed colleague, Kamau Pope, doctoral student in the history department at Duke, curator of the Mandy Carter Scientist of Activism exhibit, and facilitator of our program today. So we will paste the logistical details into the chat because it's a lot of information. We will be recording this event. During the program, you're welcome to type your questions into the Q&A feature available in the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom window. We ask for your understanding if we have technical issues. If our speaker's internet connection becomes unstable, we'll ask for your patience as we work to resolve this. If this does not work or we have other disruptions that we cannot resolve, we will end the meeting with the hopes of sharing with all who registered the portion of the presentation that was recorded. If you'd like to stay in touch with the Sally Bingham Center for Women's History and Culture and learn more about the Mandy Carter Scientist of Activism exhibit, which is on display in the Jerry and Bruce Chapel Family Gallery in the library on Duke's West Campus through December 3rd, 2023, please use the links that have been dropped into the chat just now. Thank you. I now want to call on Kamau Pope. Kamau?
Thank you so much for the introduction, Laura, and welcoming us into the space. I just would like to start us off with just a brief moment of silence. A few weeks ago, for those of you who may or may not know, we lost a queer sibling, O'Shea Sibley, due to acts of violence in New York. And so just want to create space to not only remember O'Shea, but also remember a lot of other elders, a lot of young people who are not here with us right now, but we would like to invite into the space and their spirits into this space. So we're just going to take a quick moment for that. Okay, thank you all so much for holding space for that. I would love to start off with some introductions. There are some really awesome people on this call who have a lot of history and stories and narratives to share. And so I want to ask them and invite them to share what brings them to this work and what excites them about being on this panel today. So I'm going to start off, we'll go in alphabetical order by last name. So I'll start us off with Mandy. Oh, I think you're on mute, Mandy.
My apologies, I'm still learning how to make this work. Mandy Carter, she, her, hers, here in Durham, North Carolina. A product of 18 years in the Albany Children's Home, Schenectady Children's Home, and 4 years with the Black foster family. I think what brings me here in Schenectady, we had a high school teacher who brought in someone from the American Friends Service Committee. The first time I heard the name, Bayard Rustin. They had a high school work camp down in the Pocono Mountains. The first time I heard the name Audrey Lord. And what got me most excited, however, was King's speech, April 4th, 1967. And I remember I was in California, ended up getting involved with the War Resisters League and Institute, and got arrested for civil disobedience, spent 45 days in a prison for that reason. But then I got a job with the War Resisters League in 1969. To make a long story short, San Francisco, I'm now in Durham. And what an amazing opportunity to have this conversation right now. So thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, Mandy. I'll pass it over to Walter.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I am so happy to be part of the celebration of Mandy Carter, I was able to come down to Durham for the opening of the exhibit. And I find it personally important because Mandy has such a strong commitment to nonviolence, which is something that we share going back to our childhood. I originally came to this work, if you will, seeing the scenes of the civil rights movement, the African American struggle on my television and reading about it in the papers. I was only 13 when the March on Washington took place, but I remember it vividly. And of course, I remember hearing about Bayard Rustin because he was the chief organizer and was coming up against a lot of resistance at the time, people trying to marginalize him and push him out, largely because he was a gay man and also because of his radical politics. And about, let me see, that was 1963. About 14 years later, I was fortunate enough to meet Bayard, and we fell in love and spent the next 10 years together. So I learned a tremendous amount about Bayard, of course, but about the whole philosophy and ideas behind the movement and nonviolence. So that's kind of what brought me here. Thank you.
Great. And I'm going to now invite Barbara to introduce herself.
Hello, I am in Haudenosaunee, Mohican, and Mohawk territory, which is also known as Albany, New York, the capital of New York State. I got involved. I'm so honored to be with all of you. And I got involved because Mandy has been a lifetime friend and asked me to participate. We've been involved in many struggles together. And I am so happy that she is receiving the recognition that she so richly deserves through this exhibit, and at a distinguished institution too. Whoever thought that there would be that kind of thing back in our day. But in any event, how I got involved in this work is that I grew up during the civil rights struggle. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. And when I was a teenager, my family, all of my family members are from Georgia. So I was surrounded by people who actually had lived not only in the Deep South, but in one of the worst states in the Deep South during the post-Reconstruction, Redemption, and Jim Crow eras. And they were very interested, of course, in what was going on. And as I got older, I, of course, was more and more interested, and then got involved in the civil rights struggle in Cleveland as a teenager, which, as in many northern cities, was focused on school desegregation. And they reached out to students. There was a citywide school boycott. And as I said, that's how I got involved. I watched the March on Washington in 1963 on TV, much to my sorrow, because I was 16 then. And I had a friend, we asked our aunt who was raising us by that time, we asked her if we could go. And when I say we, I always mean my twin sister and me. We asked if we could go, and she would not let us go. Our family did not travel. She certainly wasn't going to let us go somewhere as far as Washington by ourselves. But the thing that was just the topper is that one of our close friends in high school got to go. And I will never forget that. Why did she get to go? But anyway, it's something that's been in my consciousness, and it was a break point. It was a break point in U.S. history. I'm glad we have a chance to talk about it today.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I bet that high schooler came back with all of the bragging, and you were just deeply really wishing you could be there. So I want to direct this next question to you, to not only give us reflections on the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, but also what a lot of people don't know is that we're also celebrating 30th anniversaries for the March on Washington for lesbian, gay, bi, equal rights and liberation. So I would love for you to create space to kind of ground us in that moment and in that history that we're witnessing in this year as well.
Barbara?
Did you say you wanted me to respond to that?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I kind of had a feeling that it was going to be like a relay. Mandy, Walter, me. over and over again. Sorry, but be that as it may. So 30 years ago, I was trying to think what was 30 years ago. 30 years ago was a March on Washington. I believe I attended that one, but more important to me is the fact that I attended the first March on Washington for lesbian and gay rights, and that was in 1979. I came out in the mid 1970s. I had graduated from college in 1969. I was in graduate school, and that, anything that happened in the 1970s up until 1979 was less than 10 years after Stonewall. And of course, that march was smaller than subsequent marches. I think it was about 100,000, but 100,000 was remarkable because the sanctions and the violence and the hatred against and bigotry against people who were in our LGBTQIA plus community. At that time, I try to use the terms that were used at the time when I'm talking about an historical period. So in the 1970s, it was often just the gay community or the gay movement. And sometimes it was gay and lesbian. Some of us insisted, because we were lesbian feminists, is that we had to come first. So you could tell what people's politics were around feminism by if they put lesbian before gay. That's a small factoid, but just pay attention if you're reading material and looking at material, like those organizations that actually understood that women, or people defined as women at birth, were also oppressed on another level and for other reasons in addition to being queer. They listened to us. So in any event, a number of marches happened subsequently. There was a 1987 march that was huge, and that was during the height of the AIDS epidemic. And that was the first time that the quilt was displayed in its full scope on the Mall in Washington. And it was just a haunting and somber and beautiful commemoration of all the people we had lost as a result of a disease, an epidemic, and a disease that targeted people who were considered to be dispensable and who deserved whatever they got, including imminent death. The US government at that time paid no attention at all. Reagan was in office, and I don't know that he ever mentioned the word AIDS, but if he did, it was late in his administration. And because of the negligence of the government, which is the only kind of entity that really can address a pandemic, as we know, because we're still in a pandemic, although some of us want to think that it's over. But as we know, if the federal government and governments, plural, do not take this seriously, then we're in great trouble. And we lost a lot of people. I lost most of my Black gay male friends and comrades during that period because of AIDS. And the 93 March, I did attend that one as well. It wasn't as memorable for me as some of the others that I mentioned, but I think I've said enough about that, and I'd love to hear what others want to share.
What I remember, and by the way, I can't remember when we started that this is Bayard's 111th birthday, August 24th. A commemoration. Barbara, what I remember about that march in '87, you're right. The thing that really struck me was, in addition to the laying out of the quilt, the amazement of that quilt on the Mall was extraordinary. No one was going to come down and look at that. But I remembered that. But the other part that happened, remember, then on that Monday, there was the thing called Out and Outraged. I think at the time it was the largest single civil disobedience action on the steps of the Supreme Court. And also imagining, and if I'm not mistaken, Walter, loop you in, if I'm not mistaken, Bayard had been invited to speak at the '87 March. But because he passed before that march happened, he would have been there. That would have been an extraordinary journey, 1963, '87. And I think in the film Brother Outsider, but I'll defer to you, Walter, if I'm not mistaken. I think Bayard was scheduled to speak there, and I think Audrey did speak at the '79 March. I think, didn't she, Barbara? Yes, all right. But Walter, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
I will. I don't think you're wrong. In fact, today is actually the anniversary of his death, August 24th. So it's 36 years ago today that he passed. But I do believe that he was invited to speak. I think that took place in October, did it? the march. Yeah, so obviously he was not able to be there. I think when I look back on the 63 march and the marches that have taken place since then, and also the LGBT rights marches, I'm really struck by the importance of allyship and building coalitions, because that's really what Bard was all about. And he understood that if you're a member of a minority, whether it's a racial minority or a religious minority, LGBT, that you weren't going to be able to get things done on your own, that you really needed to build a movement. And you needed to, as he used to say, maximize your friends and minimize your enemies. So you didn't spend so much time, except when you had to, jumping on other people or calling people names or doing the kind of thing that we see in politics nowadays. You try and figure out ways to be inclusive and to bring people into the movement. And that Bard was somebody who was very good at that. He had spent, the 25 years before the 63 March, he had been traveling around the country as kind of a roaming ambassador for nonviolence, for racial equality, but also anti-war, anti-militarism movements. And he would visit all kinds of groups, Black, white, women's, men's groups, students, religious groups, all kinds. And so when 63 came around, he was able to call on a lot of those people that he knew and said, come out here. We need you to help us. And we need you to come out and stand up for not only for the Civil Rights Bill, but for the jobs. Because the March on Washington was originally called the March on Washington for Jobs. And it became Jobs and Freedom after the Kennedy administration introduced the civil rights legislation, which was later passed in 64. And unfortunately, the jobs part has fallen by the wayside for many years, and that's something we really need to focus on now. Income inequality, equity, and full employment.
Yes. Thank you for grounding us in that, all of you, for kind of giving us a full scope of just the range of different ways that folks have mobilized in Washington around liberation, around rights for LGBTQ people, but also thinking about jobs and thinking about economic justice. Walter, you mentioned this, and I would love to get some insight from Mandy and Barbara on this about the importance of allyship and coalition and building bridges, if you will, and trying to as you quoted, Walter, make friends and less enemies. And Mandy, Barbara, I don't know if you all have any thoughts or wisdom or advice, particularly on what allyship and building allyship has looked like for you all over the course of y'all's careers so far.
I'm so glad that you asked that, and I'm
Yeah.
so glad that Walter brought that up too. I am a Black feminist, and our politics are deeply rooted in a belief in coalition. And the comment that Walter made about, or no, I guess it was, well, I don't know, which one of you said the thing about spending time focusing, I think it was you, Walter, spending time focusing on calling people out and attacking people, that was not what the main job of a activist and the organizer should be. And nowadays, there are a number of factors that people think that if you can put someone down and prove that you are superior to them in your consciousness and in your identity, that in some, there are elements of our identities that we choose, and there's some that we do not choose. And so to claim superiority on that basis, I find really problematic. And I think that the civil rights struggle, built a culture that was called the beloved community. And I think that people who came out of the civil rights movement had kind of a bedrock of experience, values, and understanding of how important it is to work with people across differences. That is something that other people have also emphasized, I'm particularly thinking about lesbian feminists of color and anti-racist feminists. That's something that we actually put time into, and Audrey wrote and with some with some concentration about how do we work across differences. The book This Bridge Called My Back, Writings by Radical Women of Color, really is about how can there be a women's movement that is inclusive of all the kinds of voices that are in that gathering, which is a book. So as I said, there are different perspectives, but coming out of the civil rights struggle, as I said, there was a kind of mentality of like, if you get on the bus or get in the vehicle and you come down to Mississippi and you risk your life, and in some cases lose your life, trying to struggle for rights that you already have, because we weren't fighting for white rights, we were fighting for Black rights during the civil rights struggle at that time, because there was a racial divide and racism and white supremacy. Then maybe we could give you the benefit of the doubt. And I always say that the way that you pick who you can and choose who you can organize with and have in your life is based upon your politics and your values, not on your identities. So I always do a case by case assessment of like who is worth the time for me to try to be in struggle with, because it will always be a struggle, because people just inherently get on each other's nerves. I think that's the nature of humans, that we get on each other's nerves, because that's just facts, But like those that we choose to be in struggle with, it's like, do we have some basic values in common? And it's not always based on appearance or identity or sexual orientation or gender presentation. You can be very surprised at who your allies are if you do that case by case kind of assessment.
And I'll do a quick follow-up. And Walter, we talked about this. What's interesting, there's so many anniversaries you talked about. 100th anniversary of the Warrior Sisters League, 40th anniversary of a wonderful group called Southerners on New Ground. But Barbara, this is 60th anniversary of Freedom Summer. I'm sorry, with the Birmingham, what happened down in Birmingham, let alone what happened down in Mississippi. What I'm really struck by, and before I got on this call, I had mentioned this to a number of people, I guess we are called baby boomers, but now 18 to 40-year-olds have now surpassed us. If ever there was an amazing opportunity, this is it. And then the question would be, and I don't know how to do Snapchat, chit chat, I have no clue, but there's got to be a way generationally. And I'm thinking about, again, that speech when April 4th, 1967, I remember when the call went out because of Vietnam, but it wasn't just that war, it was other wars as well. But we did jail no bail intentionally. Not everyone could or should, but who was sitting in those jails? Nothing but Black women and Black men. I mean, it's like a class issue as well. But I think what I've really been intrigued by now, that with the call, whether it's like, the anniversary of Birmingham Sunday, or at least recognized, but this Saturday is going to be the 60th anniversary of the march. I'm going up. I was there, how many years ago, but I wouldn't miss that opportunity. But they're going to do something unique. They're going to do this thing. They've got that technology. So whether you can physically get there or not, but ASL, language justice, food justice, I think I'd like to just maybe do a pondering of a question to all of us, if that's all right. And thank you to the Sally Bingham Center. I'm humbled and honored, but everything in that place, it's all the buttons and the posters and all the things we've done. Barbara, when I was standing on that mall and looking at that quilt, what I thought was unique was that each quilt had the exact same size, but then each person could figure out what they wanted to look like. I think the movement's kind of like that as well. We come from different languages, different cultures, but what is it about the bottom line of equality and justice for all? Language justice, food justice, whatever that might be. And, we have a thing called the 2024 elections. Can we have that conversation? The power to vote. We didn't have the right to vote, basically. So if ever there was the time to think about how do we come together, and what would be some ways that we can be intentional around that in terms of youth, elder, geography, county, whatever that might be. So Walter, I'd like to ask you, and one thing I loved about Bard, he was a bridge builder. Not everyone wants to be, not everyone can be. But I find myself as someone who wants to try to be a bridge builder between different communities. You must have had that conversation with him from time to time, Walter. Like, why did he decide he'd want to be a bridge builder too, and not only work only in the gay community and only in the Black community or whatever? But what's the deal around the bridge building?
Well, I think it really goes back to his childhood. There's going to be a book coming out just about a month from now called Bayard Rustin, A Legacy of Protest and Politics. And it's a group of essays written by different people. And I'm in there because I wrote one about Bayard's grandmother. And I think it really goes back to her tremendous influence on him. She had been raised as a Quaker, or she had been raised in a Quaker household and attended a Quaker school for some time. When she married, she became a member of AME Church, but those Quaker values that she'd been taught as a child were really the ones that she instilled in Bayard. The belief in the oneness of the human family, the belief in nonviolence, in trying to solve conflict by sitting down and talking and looking for common ground as opposed to hitting each other over the head. And so I think, that's really all about bridge building, because, Bayard grew up in a town. It was in the north, but it was a very racist town at the time that he was there. Racial segregation in many instances was enforced in restaurants and theaters. Couldn't go to the library and study with his friends because he ended up going to an integrated high school, and he had a lot of white friends, played on the athletic teams, was a real standout as a student. But when it came time to go to the library together, they couldn't go together, or the local movie theater. Bayard was told that he had to go and sit upstairs, where the African-American community was supposed to sit. Now, that was really his first arrest, his first resistance to authority, because he refused to get up and go up into the balcony. He wanted to sit with his white friends, and they wanted him to sit with them. So, that building of bridges, building community really goes back to those early days. And it was something that really stayed with him all through his life.
Yeah, you all are really getting into the weeds of this, and I love it. Mandy, you mentioned the quilt, and you talked about how it's a symbol for how the movement is, and it got me thinking about what Barbara said of that, we all, should come to the table with a similar political value. And I'm thinking about how that's like the stitches in the quilt that kind of bind us all together, is this concept of these values. And Walter mentioned, nonviolence, and how Quaker ideology is really like a part of Bayard's like stitching of his own quilt. And Mandy, I know you and I have talked about how the Quakers have been really significant and important in your work. And so I want to invite you all to maybe we should talk about, like, what are the other threads that you all see that are political ideologies, connections that bring us all together and has kept us bound together over the years. Because y'all have been in the struggle much longer than me. I'm probably like halfway at that point where you all are at. And so I'm curious to, know what threads you all think remain strong, and maybe even what are some that you see that are kind of starting fissures that we should, as young organizers, be really mindful of.
Let's pass that to Barbara first. We've known each other how long, Barbara?
Forever. I can't even remember when we met. That's how you know somebody's a really long time friend, when you can't even remember when you did not know them, or how you met. Yeah, I'll try to speak to that. But before I do, I would just want to do a little footnote. We've been referring to the quilt, and I'm not assuming that everyone who is with us this afternoon has actually seen the quilt or knows what we're talking about, because as I said, it was displayed on the mall. And if you say quilt, you think of something that fits on a bed. No, that's not what this was. What this was like hundreds of bed-size quilts or panels. I think they were panels, because I remember the specifications
Yes.
that the person who found, conceptualized that was at Cleve. What was Cleve's last name?
Cleveland Jones.
Right,
It was
that's what I
named
was
the
gonna
Names
say.
Project. Yes.
Yes, I was
Cleveland
gonna
Jones.
say that. So the thing is, in those days, there was no email, there were virtually no fax machines, that the way that you sent information is that you put it in a print publication or you put it in the mail. And I remember seeing the specifications for your, if you're making a panel for the quilt, it should be like, say, 3x5 or 2x3 or whatever it was. So all of the panels that people made to remember a particular friend or loved one of theirs was the same size. And then, like, geographically, sometimes the pieces would be put together. But for that March on Washington in 1987, quilt panels from all over the nation were put together. And if you've ever been to the mall in Washington, it covered the expanse of the mall. So we're not talking about something that you could hang on the wall or put on a bed. We're talking about something that was massive, massive, beautiful, made out of fabric, designed by people with love, passion, and tears. And that the sheer size of that, whoever thought that there could be something made out of cloth that could cover the entire expanse of the Washington, D.C. mall? But that's what it was. And that showed, like, oh, this many people have died. And I see that. Great. I'm glad that there's a link for that in the chat, because look it up. You'll see pictures and then you'll say, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Because, you know, like, numbers are one thing, physical representation of numbers is another. You would get a sense of, like, how very many people had died. And that's why I said it was so somber. So I've taken enough time here. I think that what binds us together across movements and across identities, across heritages, etc., is a struggle for and the desire for justice. That's it. Bottom line. Every living thing needs basically the same thing, which is a source of nourishment, shelter if they're not outdoor plants or animals, and even, you know, pets need shelter. You know, there are other animals, of course. Most of the animals can live, you know, elsewhere, but they can't have their environments destroyed. You know, we have lost all these species because of the destruction of the environment. In other words, there's the destruction of homes of other living creatures and beings. So what binds us together is that passion for justice. And we can say human rights, but, you know, I'm kind of getting into other realms. And then there's a planet, you know, that is obviously in great difficulty and very dire straits at this point. So it's just that desire for justice. If we have that, we can work across differences. And I was not saying that we could work across differences no matter what. What I was saying is that the way you figure out who you can work with is if you share certain values. And some, you know, there's some people that will never happen with, and then you move on. But it's possible. I think all three of us, Walter, Mandy, and I, are here to attest that it is possible.
Barbara mentioned the desire for justice, and earlier on she mentioned the beloved community, a concept that Dr. King used to talk about all the time. And I think partly because of the immediate times that we're living in and what we're seeing unfold on the national news, including that horrific killing that Kamau mentioned earlier, and not to mention a killing in California a week or so ago of a woman simply for displaying a pride flag outside of her store. She was shot to death. And this was a straight woman, a mother with kids. So I would add to what those two concepts, the beloved community and the struggle for justice, just the struggle for simple human decency. Because when Barbara talks about shared values, you know, a lot of these people that are out there acting up, you know, they claim to be Christian, or they claim to be good Christians. Well, I think if you look, there are of course differences between the major faiths, but if you look at the core values, they're basically the same, and they do basically believe in the oneness of the human family, and you know, building alliances and building bridges. So when you start dividing people on the basis of color or gender or sexual orientation, religion, you know that there's a force out there that is doing its damnedest to splinter us. and to keep us really from working together to achieve the justice in the beloved community that we're talking about. And I mean, unfortunately, you know, from now up until the 2024 election, we're going to see a lot more of that stuff. And it can be discouraging, it can be demoralizing, but we nevertheless have to be out there to speak the fundamental truths about the oneness of the human family and working for justice, despite some of the differences that we all recognize.
You know, to follow up on you and Barbara, one thing I really have been struck by, I remember this, the notion of the power of one. And I'll just share a little thing. I remember the only thing I knew at the time that was so exasperating was that war in Vietnam. No disrespect for those who served. But to find out that the way they could get more men over there, they went into the jails. When I was sitting in Santa Rita jail, shout out to Baez and some other folks who were there as well, when we decided to oppose the war in Vietnam, we did jail no bail. And you know what they said? I can tell you right now, and mostly all white women, let's be clear that, you know, but people had a purpose. And someone said, oh my gosh, that is my husband. That is my brother. That is my father. They all of a sudden decide, Nam or jail. Think about that. And it was intentional, and they're doing it now. And I think the other part that really struck me, and that was also the grounding of what is now the Poor People's Campaign. You didn't just talk about that one particular war. I remember when King got assassinated down in Memphis, what was he doing there? Jobs. And then I remember after he got killed, there was a whole conversation about the idea of a Poor People's Campaign, literally on the mall where we're going to be on Saturday. And we decided that we would take buses from all different parts. I got on 2 buses going from San Francisco to the mall, Resurrection City, I think it was called. And we had to stop in Louisville, Kentucky, where they do the Kentucky Derby, because there had been a threat on that bus. That was in 1968. But to be on that mall with the skeeters and the rain and all that, but every day we got up and we got arrested every single day. I think it was the HUAC or something. And Barbara, we got to spend time in the DC House of Women's Detention in DC. And they all said the same thing. We all know why we're here. But the Poor People's Campaign, this gets into the notion of the power of one. Each and every one of us, if you think about where we live, no matter how we conduct our lives, I've always been thinking, what's the connector? And what are the things that they're going to try to come out after us? And this will get into certainly one of the elections where we had Obama. And I remember the conversation was, well, if we can just make sure women don't get the right to vote, we never had that. And then they get worried if we do a coalition. Women didn't have the right, we had to get that. Black folks sure didn't have, we had to get that. LGBT. So by the time you got done of all the but not you, that's the coalition. That's the amazing coalition that is out there now. And I think the question would be, especially COVID, but I have more people on here than I would ever be able to get into a meeting. And now you have ASL, Spanish, all the wonderful different, what do you call them? Different the abilities and all that, but then how do we mobilize that and capitalize on? But the other name I want to bring up is Emmett Till. Emmett Till, you might have been hearing about this, was a 14-year-old Black boy from Chicago, sent him down south like everyone did, summer of 1955. Brutally murdered because supposedly he might have whistled at a white woman. It never happened, but anyway, they murdered him. But the thing that I was so struck by his mother said, send my baby home. And then she said, I want an open casket because I want people to see what hate looks like. That casket is now at the Smithsonian. When I went to that high school work camp in the Pocono Mountains and I met Guy and Candy Carowin from the Highlander Center, and they were going down south and recording the songs of the freedom songs, and that became Sweet Honey in the Rock. Those tapes were at the Smithsonian. So there's something about archiving, but also whatever the year, whatever the ability, how do we ensure? But I think we ask. If Jane Shulman did not say, hey, I'd like to invite you to something, I wouldn't be here. And I wonder, how do we extend the invite? How do we make sure that there's a way in which I can be asked and then people get an opportunity to say, what can I do? And you don't have to know nothing from nothing. You have the passion and desire. We're in a moment. I mean, I think if ever there was a time, it's it many more times as well. And books, literature, song, dance, culture, but bring it. And by the way, Barbara, when we did that campaign against Jesse Helms in 1990, when Jesse Helms was running against Harvey Gantt, we got a check from who for Virgin Islands? Audre Lorde. I got it. Send a check. Dear Mandy, go for it. FYI. Thank you, Audrey.
I think before we get into the Q&A period, which I would really much enjoy being able to participate in, I think we need to talk about Audrey's history with the March on Washington and the history of Black, lesbian, and gay, using the term so accurate for the time, with the March on Washington. And if it's okay with you, I'll try to tell that story because I was directly involved in it. The 20th anniversary of the March on Washington was 1983. There was an organization that I was active in, the National Coalition of Black Gays. It later became the National Coalition of Black Lesbians and Gays, and I was one of the board members. I can't remember if Audrey was a board member. I believe that she was. Betty Powell, dear departed, later known as Achebe Powell, who just died this year, was a board member. Michelle Parkerson, some very, very fierce Black lesbian feminists were on that board, and we got the name of the organization visibly to include us in its name. But that's just a little footnote, but a footnote that connects to something I explained or tried to explain earlier about our naming and who gets included and what the names are. So the National Coalition of Black Gays, which was the organization for people who were out at the time, which was not very many people still, it's like early 1980s. There was a really vibrant Black, lesbian, and gay community in Washington, D.C., as we might imagine, it being a predominantly Black city at that time. And there was a decision, a mandate, so to speak, that we needed to be represented at the 1983 20th anniversary march. Now, if you know the history of the march, you know that women were not allowed to speak in 1963. And that's a whole different, a whole story. It's kind of an amazing story. And Black women tried, and mics got cut off, and it's the whole thing. You can find it, I'm sure, online. What happened to Black women or to women speaking at the 1963 March on Washington? Well, they were including women by 1983, but they were definitely not including people in our LGBTQIA+ community. So we were working on that, and the pressure was being put on. A wonderful person, a friend of both Mandy's and mine, Gil Gerald, was the executive director of the National Coalition of Black Gays. And he and I worked together closely. I lived in New York City at the time, and the demand, so to speak, was put to the movement, or to the march organizers and movement, leaders, namely Coretta Scott King, Walter Fauntroy, all the people, Jesse Jackson, all the people, who were at the forefront of all that. And we were not getting anywhere. We were getting nowhere, because as Walter Fauntroy said, a remark that will live in infamy, he said that if we include gay rights, he probably would just have said, if we include gay rights, we might as well include penguin rights. Penguins, like little birds who dress in tuxedos. Yeah, so we might as well include penguin rights. It's irrelevant as including Black people who are also not cisgendered heterosexuals, okay? So Gil called me up like probably Wednesday of the week that the march was happening on Saturday. And he said, Barbara, he said, it's not going to happen. They're refusing. It is not going to happen. We did this, we did that. There were 3 people. One of the things they said is like, is there anybody qualified to speak? Does that sound familiar? I mean, we just lost affirmative action. Is there anybody who's qualified? And so the 3 names that were on the list were James Baldwin, Audrey Lorde, and myself. And so we gave them names. And so, as I said, he called to say it's not happening. And I was just distraught. I was so upset. Then on that Thursday, probably, there was a sit-in in Walter Fauntroy's office. Now, Walter Fauntroy was the member of Congress that represented Washington, D.C. without a vote. That's how that still goes, because Washington is not the state that it should be. But be that as it may, these four black gay men sat in Walter Fauntroy's office. They were arrested. And the irony of you sit in, I think Walter Fauntroy was probably in SNCC or something. He was definitely a part of the civil rights movement as a young person. And the idea that you had to sit in a black person's office, a black person's office for rights that they do not wish to grant to you, no irony there at all. And so that was what turned the tide. We won. We won. And the next day, on that Friday before the Saturday of the march, there was a press conference led, I think, by Coretta Scott King. Unfortunately, although we were dashing to get there, I did not get there in time for the press conference. I will always be distraught over that. But it was basically the first time, to my knowledge, that significant Black leadership, national leadership, spoke out in favor of rights for people in our LGBTQIA plus community. It was historic. And how was it won? Through struggle. So Audrey became the person that spoke, that was invited to speak. And she indeed did do that. And you can hear her speech. I think that speech may be online. But that was a real historic moment. And that was the 1983 march.
Yes, thank you for grounding us in that, Barbara. That was going to be my next question before we actually went to Q&A. So for our folks who are joining us, I see that there are some questions, but if folks have more questions, because there's so much we can learn, I wish we had multiple hours for all of us to be on this call together, because I feel like I'm learning a lot. Mandy, you mentioned the Poor People's Campaign earlier, and there's actually a question from a comrade who is in the leadership of the North Carolina Poor People's Campaign. A lot of what you all were talking about earlier with values really leaned into this concept of intersectional organizing. And this person has a question about how they often hear activists complaining about that the Poor People's Campaign, through Reverend Barber's naming of Moral Fusion organizing, has, quote, too many issues and, quote, can't get things done that way. This person's a huge believer of that as a theory of change, of intersectional organizing, but they'd love to hear y'all's take on this debate.
Thank you. First of all, poorpeoplescampaign.org, poorpeoplescampaign.org. They're going to be doing something, I think, later this summer. I mean, later in the year, and you can go there. You know, it's a great point. I have to say, you know, if you're trying to do too many things at one time, but I'm looking at each one of us. I'm Black. I got to keep that. I'm a lesbian, you know, so I can't divide myself. More importantly, what are the common denominators? And if it's how, like, all right, this is it. Clean water, clean air. No one should be homeless. No one should be hungry. Everyone should have access to an education and healthcare, however you define that. And I think if you look at it that way, but as an organizer, I don't have to be the one group that does everything. I like to partner and be in coalition. And that's possible. I'm not sure if that's coming from a place of like we're doing too much or not too much or too many. But what I love, though, Kamau and Walter and Barbara, but now you have so much infrastructure. People are actually getting paid and/or finding ways. There was never peace studies. There was never women's studies. And people are realizing that if there's don't mourn, organize, if there's a need, fill it. The other thing I would really like to say, though, if people are really interested in information, Barbara just mentioned something. Think about who came before. Think about who came before, and then keep either adding on or figure out how do we make sure that can happen now. I mean, and I'll do this real quick. In the state of North Carolina, we have 100 counties. 100 counties. We're going to get a 14th congressional district. A lot of people are moving to the south, but this ain't Mississippi, Alabama, North, and going further down. But you've got the National Black Justice Coalition. You've got the other organizations that exist that you can be a kind of part of. But if you're on a college campus or in a high school, or can I also talk, and I'll leave it at this, faith-based organizing, like it or not, but it had not been for the American Friends Service Committee, the Unitarians, that's just me, Black churches, you got the sororities. So I think if everyone tries to figure out what can I do, where can I be a part of that, and then figuring out what you decide, what you want to be a part of individually, or then join some other organizations, Love North Carolina, be a part of it. Song is a great one. southernersonnewground.org, nationalblackjusticecoalition.org. Make it happen.
Thank you, Mandy. Thank you so much. Walter, I feel like this is a good question that we got earlier on before we even hopped on this call. And I know that art and photography and documentaries are really a part of how you've been able to share the story of Bayard. And I was wondering if you could talk about the role that music and art particularly plays in how we honor justice work, how we talk about justice work, and also organizers who have come before us.
Yeah, I can say a few things about that. Bayard really came from, well, to use the word old school at this point, it's almost redundant. It's shall we say very old school, when they actually taught kids art and music and public speaking and things like that, the creative arts and English in the public schools. And he did have a native talent. He had a tremendous, a wonderful tenor voice that he used, but he didn't use it just as a vehicle for expressing beauty. He used it as a means of expressing ideas. And he drew from the African American spirituals. He drew from some of the songs that derived really from the lessons in the Old Testament. Ezekiel saw the wheel, or Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, things like that. And those spirituals were really what a lot of the African American community who were struggling during, periods of enslavement were using to keep their spirit alive and to keep energized, and also as a way of communicating. He used to talk about, specifically, there was a song called Steal Away. And if that was being sung at a particular time, it was like a whistle to that there was going to be a meeting somewhere later that evening or something. And so you were supposed to steal away and go to the meeting. So Bayard used music as a means of motivating people and also as a way of diffusing tension. You might get to a point in a particular demonstration where you were having a standoff. I know something very specific happened on the Thai-Cambodian border, where a group of people who were trying to get medicine and food across to help the Indo-Chinese refugees were being stopped by the military. I think it was the Cambodian military at that time. And it was kind of face to face. Here were these nonviolent activists face to face with people carrying machine guns and weapons. And it's like, well, where do we go from here? And Bard stood up and started singing We Shall Overcome, and led the crowd in several choruses of that. And I'm not going to pretend that it solved the problem, but it gave some breathing space, and it gave people a chance to kind of relax and figure out, well, what are the next steps that we're going to make. So again, it wasn't just a vehicle for his personal expression of what a wonderful voice he had. It was a way of organizing and keeping cohesion at a moment when things might start to fragment.
Thank you so much, Walter. Barbara, do you have something
Can I
to
just
add?
say that when people were imprisoned, jailed during the civil rights struggle, and perhaps during some other struggles, but particularly during the civil rights struggle, the people who were in prison would sing. And the men and women would be separated. So the way that they could kind of communicate with each other, that, we're still here, we're still hanging in, was by singing. And the civil rights movement was a singing movement. And of course, Bayard, who was one of the architects of that movement, it's not a surprise in some ways that he also used his voice, as Walter just beautifully described.
And a beautiful voice at that. I think there's some CDs if I'm not mistaken, right? Wonderful voice.
Yeah, and the soundtrack, Brother Outsider, which is going to be shown at the Nasher late in September. They're doing a showing of Brother Outsider, The Life of Bayard Rustin. A lot of the soundtrack of that is Bayard singing some of these songs that I talked about. Work songs, freedom songs, spirituals. So if you get a chance to visit the Nasher's website and look on the events page, maybe you'll be able to join us at the Nasher for that showing.
And what about the film Bustin' coming up? Have you all heard? When is it coming out? Rustin,
Rested.
the
Oh,
film, the
yes, of
movie.
course.
When is that? Netflix or something is coming.
It is a Netflix film. It is not strictly a biopic because it's not a documentary and it's not a biopic. It focuses really on the period that we're talking about right now, the 10 to 12 weeks leading up to the March on Washington. So it's kind of telling Bayard's story through his organizing of that march. And it includes a number of people who are still with us. Eleanor Holmes Norton is a character, Joyce Ladner, Rochelle Horowitz, Cortland Cox, Norman Hill. These are all characters in the film. And it's the first feature film that's coming out from the Obama company, Higher Ground, which is, I guess, a subsidiary, might be the word, of Netflix. It's premiering on November 3rd in theaters, and it will be streaming on Netflix, I believe, starting on November 17th. So it's an opportunity, not only to learn about Bayard, but to, see some great performances. Coleman Domingo is giving what I think will certainly be an Academy Award nominated performance, playing Bayard. Audra McDonald is in there playing Ella Baker. Glyn Turman is playing A. Philip Randolph. Chris Rock is playing Roy Wilkins. So, there are a lot of, shall we say, important actors that are taking part in this film.
Can I scream, please?
Yes,
I need to scream.
especially on one of those, but we'll go.
Yeah, well, no, Chris Rock playing Roy Wilkins, that's just like far out. That's far out because
Right.
if y'all know about Roy
Ooh.
Wilkins, to say they were opposites and that they were opposites in personality, he was one of the most proper, quiet people, because I grew up seeing him, I mean, it's not something I read about in a book, he would be on TV, he was like a church deacon to me.
Yeah.
And then there's Chris Rock. I love it. I can't
Hey.
wait. Well, thank you for telling us
Hey.
about that.
First
what can
behind
I
the
say?
scenes.
There were moments when I wanted to slap him, but that's already been done.
All right. This is one of those wonderful behind the scenes before you see all this stuff, y'all. So this is very good.
This
Yeah.
is great.
Yeah.
This is so wonderful.
That is awesome. Yes, thank you all for sharing all of the stuff that's coming down the pipeline. And I hope that we're reaching the top of the hour. So I would just love for you all to just say one last word. A lot of people just really want to know what's something you wish you learned earlier.
I'm not sure.
Well, I can certainly.
Okay,
I
go.
can
Good.
certainly
Thank you.
say- It's okay. I can certainly say, I think patience. Patient person, peaceful person, and it's only as I got older that I realized I wasn't quite so as patient and peaceful as I think. And when I start to question that, I look to Bayard for the guidance, because that was something that he really maintained all through his life. And believe me, he needed the patience. I don't need the patience nearly as much as he did when he was working in the movement and trying to keep those coalitions together. So I'm grateful to have shared my part of my life with him and still learning the lessons that he taught me.
Awesome.
And I'll go real quick. I think for me, Kamau, and first of all, thank you, Sally Bingham, for us doing this, and Barbara and Walter and everyone here. To me, I think what resonates for me, the changing of hearts and minds and the changing of public policy, and that consistent feeling and how you make that work. And all of us has the power of one. We all have a moral compass, the power of one. Pass it to Barbara.
I'm going to be really honest. I can't think of anything I would have done differently, because everything that occurred in my life, from being born into the particular family I was born into, which was the best decision that anyone could have made, because they so nurtured all the things that in the capacities that I've used to do the kind of work I want to do. I really can't think of anything. I guess the major thing I would say is just keep on struggling. And if you're not happy and the political work that you're doing, if you don't feel fulfilled, do something else. I mean, not do something else to leave the work to to other people, but find another niche, find another place that you feel that your talents are recognized and best utilized. You should not be miserable doing political work. And I get a great deal of joy from doing political work. Not everybody's wired the same way, but I just, like, we just have to keep our shoulders to the wheel. And I think the thing that Walter, I'm not going to be able to say it correctly, like more, what was it? More, why don't you say it? More connection, less whatever, about being able to be decent with each other. What did you say that that Bayard would say?
Well, human decency, or
No, it was like more of this, less of that, or something. I can't remember what what it
maximizing your
was.
friends and minimizing your enemies, and don't demonize people.
Right.
Yes.
Not always easy, but try and connect with them, figure out where they are, and try and find that connection that might be possible.
Exactly. Yes. The struggle is worth the work. So I am so grateful to have shared this space with you all. Wherever folks are at, I hope you hung around the 3 minutes we went over, but please, wherever you are, give them a round of applause, because these folks are amazing and have displayed a wealth of knowledge and wisdom and narratives for us to be able to carry on throughout the rest of our day. And also the rest of this year, with all of these movement anniversaries this year and the next year and the years to come. I also would like to, on behalf of the Sally Bingham Center, thank the Reverend Jeanette Stokes. Would love to
yes,
thank the
Jeanette.
E. Rhodes and Carpenter Foundation, and
Yes.
would like to give a shout out to the David M. Rubenstein Rare Book and Manuscript Library. For those of you who are based in Durham or visiting Durham, the exhibit, Mandy Carter, the Scientist of Activism, is up until December the 3rd of this year. There's also an online exhibit for those who can't make it. If you would love to read about the work that Mandy has done alongside and in connection to and in collaboration with both Walter and Barbara throughout our lifetimes together. So with that being said, thank you all so much. Go off.
Thank you, Kamau.
Do
Thank
good
you.
work.
Thank you, Kamau.
And,
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank
Laura
you.
Kelly and all the rest. Thank you.
Yes.
Mhm.
Thank you all.
Thank
Hope to see
you.
you soon.